Mack Brown. Can coaches be too old, Caleb?
Well, Mack Brown doesn't think so. Mack Brown said this week, quote, "Every coach recruiting against us says I'm going to quit. And 6 of them have been fired that said that already." That's what he said at ACC Media Days, I believe. This is obviously relevant. We know we don't get into it. We're not going to talk about it, but we know what happened politically this week where someone dropped out of a presidential race because their age was the obvious factor. The strongest defenders of Joe Paterno, you know what they say, Dave? They'll say, well, he was just too old at the time. So he was too senile to know what was going on. If he was too senile, he shouldn't have been the head coach. Okay, period, end of story. I don't think coaches can be too old. Let me take that. I think coaches can be too old. But it's a case-by-case basis. Some coaches are 55 going on 90. Other coaches, quite honestly, are 75 going on 40. And Rick Barnes is 72 or 70, and I think he's like a 50-year-old.
Like Tiger Woods, for instance, he's 48, and his body probably feels like a 60-year-old. I'm gonna say that it doesn't matter whatsoever, and I'll say this based off just an experience I had this morning. I was at the gym with a brand new sponsor who we get to introduce here in the next couple of weeks, and we certainly appreciate them. Thank you, National Fitness Center. But I was at the gym this morning, and I'm 50. I just turned 50, and I saw a guy that looked like, facial-wise, he was about your age, probably 30s or maybe even younger, and he was in absolutely horrible shape. And he also smelled a little bit like cigarettes. So, I mean, there's a reason that the life expectancy in the U.S. is 74. It's because we've made a lot of medical advances. So, it was 150 years ago, I think the average life expectancy, Caleb, was 45. So I think you can be sharper, but I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. And this kind of hit home in a different sort of way with Pat Summitt. I think it's incredibly difficult to expect the coach to make that call. Now, I know her lack of brain function accelerated because of the disease, but to ask her, hey, are you still good to coach? That's futile. Because as much as I hate to say it, and I love her to death, and I have as much respect for her as anybody I've ever met in the sports world. Anybody. She wasn't capable of making that call.
No. And I thought the university, this was part of what they did to Dave Hart, and they should be ashamed of themselves for. Maybe not ashamed, but they made Dave Hart make that tough decision. And then they left him out to dry to act like, he forced, they made Dave Hart force her out, and then they let the Pat Summitt fan base get angry about it. And I'm like, somebody had to make that tough decision. You can't tell.
Help me with the timeline here. Dave Hart, I know, was hired to be a hatchet man and fire a bunch of people that were associate athletic directors.
Pat Summitt announced that she has dementia in April of 2011. In April, in spring or summer, or middle of 2011. Dave Hart is hired in September of 2011. Pat Summitt steps down after the 2011-2012 season. Dave Hart was brought in to be the bad guy to force Pat Summitt out.
I'm not sure it was Pat Summitt, but I think he was there to clean house, and she, because of the disease, fell on the chopping block.
Yes. You couldn't let her.
There are a lot of associate ADs over there that are not over there anymore.
You couldn't let her coach when she had dementia that was going to spread rapidly. Now, on a let's get a little less morbid, because
advance rapidly. You can't catch
it. Yes, advance rapidly. Let's get less morbid. I'll give you an example of where age showed, because Mack Brown is 72. His career, actually, from his Texas career, Dave, is very similar to me to Philip Fulmer's Tennessee career. They had kind of similar runs at Texas and Tennessee. Philip Fulmer was fired at 58. We all agree that at age 58, the game had already passed him by, right? To a certain degree.
No, I don't agree. I don't agree the game passed him by. I think he lost his intensity in the early 2000s. So no, I don't agree the game passed him by. I don't think his was an age issue at all.
I thought the game somewhat passed him by. I thought he had not. I put it this: I thought he did not keep up with the changing times of college football.
Okay. To your point, he was never going to do what Josh Heupel did offensively because he wasn't willing to turn over the reins to someone to do something like that. But his foundation still works to this day, and it does at Georgia. Be a great recruiter, have the Jimmies and Joes, and the X's and O's will take care of itself. So
but
that
he
was
missed
the approach.
But to our actually previous talking point, funny enough, he lost sight of the fact that it wasn't going to be as easy to get the Jimmies and Joes as it was in the 90s. He lost sight of that fact.
Okay, so recruiting against Spurrier and Kirby Smart is more difficult than recruiting against Jim Donnan and Brad Scott. Yes, I'll give you that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, I remember I wrote an article one time where I said Tennessee fans, Ray Goff is not walking through that door. Okay, the whole Rick Peter Larry Bird thing. Sorry, Ray Goff's not walking through the door at Georgia. The minute Mark Richt went to Georgia, that changed the entire trajectory of Tennessee recruiting. And I think Fulmer had been developed in a certain way under Doug Dickey and as a coach under Johnny Majors and thought this is the way things are done. And as he got older, he couldn't see the changing landscape of college football. You look at a Nick Saban. Nick Saban could have coached another 10 years, I feel like. And he was 74 or 73, something like that.
Not to get too sidetracked on you, but Timothy said Caleb Calhoun false. These players got him fired because they thought they knew more. You're both right, because he gave them too much freedom, especially the good players in the early 2000s when they got in trouble. So then they thought they knew more and had things figured out. Like Eric, I mean, can you imagine any player under Nick Saban coming out and doing a public interview on a radio station in pterodactyl like Arian Foster did?
No.
That's embarrassing to the. I mean, let's be honest. Ha ha ha! It's funny, but it's embarrassing to the university. He's on live radio, and these guys are trying to have him on. And I was standing off to the side, and and I'm just like, I mean, that's embarrassing. Nick Saban would have called him in the office the next day and say, "You need to call and apologize to them." He had lost total control of the program, and that's just one example. The fact that he would have James Banks supposedly run because he did something wrong at practice. Instead, James Banks did knee bends and just all out refused to run. Well, you kick him the hell out of your practice and maybe off your team if he just completely disregards what you tell him. That's your job as a coach and a boss.
Well, it's funny you say that. Exactly. And Fulmer had a thing because there were some academic issues for a minute for certain players. And Fulmer had a thing, and you probably were covering this, Dave. And now take it with a grain of salt. This was Kenny Smith. You know the Kenny Smith situation with Alabama and all of that. But according to him, if you skip class and you aren't doing well in school, all Fulmer would do is go run a lap at practice. Okay. If I don't want to go to class and all I got to do is run a lap, well, then I'll run the lap. I'll call it a day. I mean, you should be go to class or you can play or you're off this team. I mean, and you're right. Things got totally out of control under Fulmer, and it all came to a head. Everybody talks about the Rick Clausen, Eric Ainge thing in 2005. That's not what derailed the team, actually. The arrest in the offseason are what derailed that team.
I think you're right.